The Boeing 737 trembled at 37,000 feet, its engines humming their familiar tune across the Pacific darkness. In seat 14B, Captain Valentina Reaper Kozlov pressed her forehead against the oval window, watching the navigation lights of two F-22 Raptors slice through the night like hunting sharks. Most passengers slept through the routine military escort, standard protocol for civilian flights crossing restricted airspace near the disputed Senkaku Islands. But Valentina knew those weren't routine shadows dancing off her wingtip. The lead Raptor's pilot was flying too tight, his wingman too loose. Amateur hour at 40,000 feet, she thought, recognizing the telltale signs of pilots more comfortable with flight simulators than actual stick time. The formation wobbled slightly as they adjusted course, and Valentina's jaw tightened. These weren't the usual professionals who escorted commercial traffic through the zone. Something was wrong. Her BlackBerry buzzed against her lap, an encrypted message that shouldn't have been possible at cruising altitude. The sender's call sign made her blood freeze. Blackbird 6. Her former squadron commander, a man who'd been dead for 3 years, killed in a training accident over Nevada. Yet here was his signature encryption, his tactical brevity, his unmistakable style. Reaper package inbound. Authorization Tango 77, your needed topside, acknowledge. Valentina's hands trembled as she stared at the impossible message. Blackbird 6 had been like a father to her, the only superior officer who'd seen past her gender to recognize a natural pilot. His death had ended her Air Force career, not officially, but emotionally. She'd resigned her commission 6 months later, unable to fly combat missions without his steady voice guiding her through the chaos. Now somehow, that voice was calling her back. The 737's captain came over the intercom, his tone carefully neutral. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing minor navigation adjustments due to military exercises in the area. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. But Valentina caught the subtle tremor in his words, the way he cleared his throat afterward. This wasn't a routine announcement. Through her window, she watched the F-22's shift formation again, and this time she recognized the maneuver, a tactical spread used for intercepting unknown aircraft. They weren't escorting the 737 anymore. They were positioning to engage something else, something that hadn't shown up on civilian radar but was definitely out there in the darkness. Her BlackBerry buzzed again. Reaper, you have 90 seconds to respond. The package won't wait. Outside, the stars began to disappear behind a wall of clouds that looked too uniform, too deliberate. And in the distance, barely visible against the black water below, Valentina spotted what the F-22s were really hunting, a formation of aircraft running dark, their navigation lights extinguished, approaching fast from the south. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, unusually tense. Is there a Captain Kozlov aboard this aircraft? Please identify yourself to the flight crew immediately. Every head in the cabin turned toward Valentina. Her cover was blown, her quiet retirement shattered. The war she'd tried to leave behind had found her at 37,000 feet, and now she had to choose: remain a passenger in someone else's fight or become Reaper once more. The Boeing 737's intercom system shouldn't have been capable of receiving military frequencies, but the voice that filled the cabin next was unmistakably air traffic control from Yokota Air Base. Commercial Flight 447, you have military aircraft requesting immediate conference with passenger Kozlov. Prepare for mid-air personnel transfer. Valentina closed her eyes and felt the familiar weight of command settling on her shoulders. The retirement was over. Reaper was back. Her fingers moved to the response key on her BlackBerry, muscle memory taking over as she typed the 4 letters that would change everything. Reaper Actual ACKNOWLEDGES. Ready to receive. The moment she hit send, the F-22s broke formation. The lead Raptor executed a perfect barrel roll around the 737 starboard wing, coming so close that Valentina could see the pilot's helmet through his canopy. But it wasn't a showboat maneuver. It was a salute, the kind reserved for legends. The wingman followed suit, both fighters acknowledging something the civilian passengers couldn't understand. Captain Valentina Kozlov, call sign Reaper, hadn't flown a combat mission in 4 years, but every pilot in the Pacific theater knew her reputation. She was the woman who'd single-handedly turned the tide in the Strait of Hormuz, the ace who'd earned her call sign not through kills, but through an uncanny ability to appear wherever death was stalking American forces and somehow cheat it. Now, as the 737 began a controlled descent toward an aircraft carrier that definitely wasn't supposed to exist in these waters, Valentina unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. The other passengers stared in confusion, but she ignored them, moving toward the cockpit with the fluid grace of someone who belonged in the sky. The flight attendant tried to stop her, but the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ma'am, please proceed to the cockpit immediately. We have instructions." Through the aircraft's small windows, more shapes materialized in the darkness. Not just the 2 F-22s anymore. An entire strike package was forming up around them. FA-18 Super Hornets, EA-18G Growlers for electronic warfare, and in the distance, the unmistakable silhouette of a B-2 Spirit bomber. Whatever was happening tonight, it was big enough to risk exposing some of America's most advanced aircraft. Valentina's phone buzzed one final time. "Reaper, this is Admiral Hayes, Pacific Fleet. What I'm about to tell you didn't come through official channels, and it never will. We have a situation that requires someone with your particular expertise. Someone who understands that sometimes the best way to prevent a war is to fight one that never officially happened." She looked out at the formation of American warplanes surrounding her civilian airliner and realized this wasn't just a military operation. This was a ghost mission, the kind that would never appear in any official record. The kind where success meant no one would ever know what they'd prevented, and failure meant starting World War III. The 737's nose pitched down as they began their approach to the carrier, and Valentina felt her pulse quicken for the first time in years. Reaper was about to fly again. The USS Gerald R. Ford materialized out of the Pacific darkness like a floating city, its flight deck blazing with landing lights that turned the night into artificial day. But this wasn't the Ford's scheduled position. Valentina knew enough about carrier operations to recognize that this massive nuclear-powered fortress was operating far outside its normal patrol area, deep in waters where its presence would be considered an act of war by at least 3 different nations. The 737's approach to the carrier was impossible by every regulation she knew, yet it was happening. The massive airliner settled onto the Ford's flight deck with a precision that spoke to either incredible pilot skill or technology she didn't know existed. As the engines wound down, Valentina heard the distinctive whine of fighter jets launching from the catapults. The carrier was conducting full combat operations even as it recovered a civilian aircraft. The cockpit door opened, and the 737's captain emerged, his face pale but determined. He wasn't wearing a commercial airline uniform anymore. The insignia on his shoulders marked him as Navy, a commander whose normal job involved flying EA-18G Growlers, not Boeing airliners. This entire flight had been military from the beginning. "Captain Kozlov," he said, extending his hand. "Commander Jake Morrison, VAQ-142, welcome back to the war." Through the aircraft's windows, she could see Navy personnel in full battle dress surrounding the plane, but their weapons weren't pointed outward in defense. They were scanning the skies above, as if expecting an attack from aircraft that could appear without warning. Whatever threat had prompted this operation, it came from above, not below. Admiral Hayes appeared at the aircraft door, his presence commanding even in the artificial light of the carrier deck. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 50, with the kind of weathered face that came from spending decades at sea. But his eyes held the weight of someone who made decisions that could change the course of history. "Captain Kozlov," he said as she stepped off the plane, the carrier's deck plates solid beneath her feet. "Thank you for coming. I know this wasn't exactly voluntary." "Admiral," she replied, snapping to attention despite her civilian clothes. "With respect, sir, what the hell is going on out here?" Hayes gestured toward the carrier's superstructure, where radar arrays turned constantly, searching for threats in the darkness above. 3 hours ago, our early warning systems detected aircraft approaching from the north, aircraft that shouldn't exist. They're using stealth technology we don't recognize, flying in formations that don't match any known military doctrine, and they're heading directly for the Senkaku Islands. He paused, studying her reaction. "The problem is, Captain, they're not Chinese, Russian, or North Korean. The signatures we're tracking suggest technology at least 20 years ahead of anything in our current intelligence estimates, and they're not responding to any attempts at communication." Valentina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Pacific wind. "Sir, are you suggesting we're dealing with unknown origin?" Hayes cut her off. "That's the official designation. What I need from you isn't your speculation about where they came from. I need your expertise in aerial combat against opponents who don't follow conventional rules." He led her toward the carrier's island, past rows of F-18 Super Hornets being armed with air-to-air missiles. The activity on the flight deck was controlled chaos, but she could see the tension in every sailor's movements. This wasn't a drill. As they climbed the stairs to the carrier's Combat Information Center, Hayes continued, "Your call sign didn't come from kills, Captain. It came from your ability to survive encounters that should have been impossible. The Strait of Hormuz, the incident over Syria, that classified operation in the South China Sea, you have a track record of coming back from missions that other pilots didn't survive." The CIC was a cathedral of screens and data, dozens of technicians monitoring threats that appeared and vanished like ghosts on their displays. But at the center of it all was a single tactical display that made Valentina's breath catch in her throat. 12 unknown aircraft, flying in a perfect diamond formation at 60,000 feet, moving at speeds that should have torn any conventional aircraft apart. They were heading directly for the disputed islands, and their estimated time of arrival was 43 minutes. "Admiral," she said quietly, "what exactly are you asking me to do?" Hayes looked at her with the expression of a man who was about to order someone into hell. "I'm asking you to get back in a cockpit, Captain, because in about 40 minutes, those unknowns are going to reach the Senkakus, and when they do, we need someone up there who knows how to fight something that might not be entirely conventional." Behind him, a communications officer called out, "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the unknowns. Audio only, no video." The CIC fell silent as the message filled the room, spoken in perfect, unaccented English. "United States Navy vessels, you are operating in violation of the Territorial Accord of 2847. Withdraw immediately or face consequences. This is your only warning." Valentina felt her blood turn to ice. The Territorial Accord of 2847 wouldn't be signed for another 822 years. The silence in the CIC stretched for 10 heartbeats before Admiral Hayes spoke again, his voice steady despite the impossible message they'd just heard. "Captain Kozlov, how quickly can you get back in the cockpit?" Valentina stared at the tactical display, watching the 12 unknowns maintain their perfect formation as they approached the islands. Every instinct she developed over 15 years of combat flying was screaming that this was wrong, that the aircraft on the screen weren't just advanced. They were operating according to principles that shouldn't exist. "Sir," she said carefully, "what kind of aircraft am I supposed to fly against?" "That." Hayes nodded to one of his officers, who brought up a new display. The image that appeared made Valentina's heart race, despite her years of experience with cutting-edge military hardware. It was an aircraft she'd never seen before, sleek and angular in a way that seemed almost organic, as if it had been grown rather than built. Experimental designation X-47C Phantom, Hayes explained. Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, it's been in development for 8 years, incorporating technology we acquired from various sources. It's designed for exactly this kind of situation, encounters with aerial threats that operate outside known parameters. The Phantom looked like something from science fiction, all curved surfaces and impossible angles that seemed to bend light around them. But what caught her attention were the weapon systems, hardpoints for missiles she didn't recognize, and what appeared to be some kind of energy weapon integrated into the aircraft's nose. "Admiral," she said slowly, "where exactly did this technology come from?" Hayes met her eyes with the expression of a man who'd made peace with secrets that could destroy careers. "Let's just say that over the past decade, we've recovered certain artifacts from crash sites that officially never happened. The Phantom incorporates reverse-engineered systems that we're still learning to understand." A new voice cut through the CIC's tension, the communications officer again. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the unknowns. They're asking specifically for the pilot-designated Reaper." Every head in the CIC turned toward Valentina. The message that followed seemed to come from inside her own mind rather than the speakers around them. "Captain Valentina Kozlov, call sign Reaper. We know you're listening. You have 37 minutes to launch or the timeline becomes fixed. The choice is yours, but choose quickly." The Admiral was staring at her with a mixture of suspicion and hope. "Captain, is there something you haven't told us about your service record?" Valentina's mind raced back through her career, searching for any connection to the impossible situation unfolding around them. The classified missions, the unexplained encounters, the times she'd survived when logic said she shouldn't have, suddenly, they all took on a different meaning. "Sir," she said quietly, "I need to see that aircraft now." The hangar deck of the Gerald R. Ford had been cleared of all but essential personnel, and those who remained moved with the careful urgency of people handling something that could change the course of history. The X-47C Phantom sat in the center of the space like a predator at rest, its surfaces seeming to shift and flow even though Valentina knew it was perfectly still. As she approached the aircraft, her trained pilot's eye took in details that defied conventional aerodynamics. The Phantom's wingspan appeared to change depending on the viewing angle, and the cockpit was sealed with what looked like liquid metal rather than traditional canopy materials. Most unsettling of all, she could swear the aircraft was watching her approach. "The neural interface is the most advanced part of the system," explained Dr. Sarah Chen, the project's lead engineer, as she handed Valentina a helmet unlike anything she'd ever seen. Instead of traditional flight gear, it was covered in hair-thin filaments that seemed to move on their own. The Phantom doesn't respond to conventional controls. It reads the pilot's intentions directly and translates them into flight commands. Valentina hefted the helmet, feeling its weight, or lack thereof. The materials felt both solid and somehow fluid, as if they existed in a state between matter and energy. "Doctor, how exactly does this work?" "Honestly, we're not entirely sure," Chen admitted, her voice carrying the frustration of a scientist working with technology beyond her understanding. "We can describe what it does, but the underlying principles are unclear. What we do know is that it requires a pilot with exceptional spatial awareness and the ability to think in three-dimensional combat scenarios." Hayes appeared beside them, his expression grim. "Captain, the unknowns have accelerated their approach. We now have 28 minutes until they reach the Senkakis. Whatever they're planning to do there, we can't let it happen." Valentina looked up at the Phantom's cockpit, which had begun to glow with a soft, blue light as if sensing her proximity. "Admiral, What happens if I don't come back from this? Then the world changes in ways we can't predict, he said simply. Captain, I'm not going to lie to you. This mission has a low probability of success, and we don't fully understand the risks. But you're the only pilot who's consistently survived encounters with the impossible. She was about to respond when alarms began blaring throughout the carrier. The voice over the intercom was tight with controlled panic. General quarters, general quarters. All hands man your battle stations. Unknown aircraft detected at 200 miles and closing fast. The tactical situation had just accelerated beyond all planning. Through the hangar's massive doors, Valentina could see the carrier's defensive systems coming online. Phalanx CIWS guns tracked invisible targets, while sailors scrambled to prepare the flight deck for combat operations. In the distance, she could hear the distinctive sound of F-18 Super Hornets launching from the catapults, their afterburners painting the night sky with tongues of flame. Captain, Hayes said urgently, you need to make your decision now. Valentina looked at the Phantom one more time, then at the helmet in her hands. Every rational part of her mind screamed that this was insane, flying an experimental aircraft with unknown capabilities against enemies that might not even be human. But the part of her that had earned the call sign Reaper, the part that had always found a way to come home when others didn't, whispered a different answer. She pulled on the helmet. The moment the neural interface activated, Valentina's world exploded into pure information. She could feel the Phantom systems integrating with her consciousness, her awareness expanding beyond her physical body to encompass the aircraft itself. It was like nothing she'd ever experienced, not just flying a plane, but becoming one with it in a way that transcended traditional pilot training. Through the Phantom's sensors, she could perceive the approaching unknowns not as radar blips, but as distinct presences moving through the night sky. 12 entities of incredible power and purpose, their intentions hidden behind layers of technology she couldn't begin to understand. But more disturbing was the sense that they were aware of her as well, that her activation of the Phantom systems had somehow announced her presence to whatever intelligence guided them. Systems check complete, she reported, her voice strange to her own ears. The neural interface was translating her thoughts into speech faster than she could form the words. Phantom responding to neural commands. I'm ready for launch. The carrier's catapult system engaged with a sound like thunder, and Valentina felt herself pressed back into the pilot's seat as the Phantom accelerated from 0 to launch speed in less than 3 seconds. But instead of the violent acceleration she expected, the experience was smooth, almost gentle, as if the aircraft were cushioning her from the physical forces involved. As the Phantom cleared the carrier's deck and climbed into the night sky, Valentina's enhanced awareness picked up the formation of unknowns dead ahead. They were still maintaining their diamond pattern, but she could sense something else now, a kind of patient waiting, as if they'd been expecting her arrival. The radio crackled with Admiral Hayes' voice. Reaper, you are cleared to engage at your discretion. Rules of engagement are weapons-free, but remember, we need to know what we're dealing with. Valentina armed the Phantom's weapons systems, feeling the aircraft's response like an extension of her own body. But as she closed the distance to intercept, one of the unknowns broke formation and turned directly toward her, moving with impossible grace and speed. The encounter she'd been chosen for was about to begin. The unknown aircraft approached with a fluid motion that defied physics, accelerating and changing direction without any visible control surfaces or propulsion system. Through the Phantom's neural interface, Valentina could sense its approach like a predator recognizing another apex hunter. But there was something else in the sensation, a kind of familiarity that made no sense given the impossible nature of what she was facing. Reaper to control, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. I have visual contact with lead unknown. It's, Admiral, this doesn't look like any aircraft in our database. Understood, Reaper. Can you describe what you're seeing? Valentina struggled to find words for what the Phantom's sensors were showing her. The unknown wasn't just an aircraft. It was something that seemed to exist partially outside normal space, its edges shifting and flowing like water. When she tried to focus on its details, they seemed to slide away from her perception, as if the craft were actively resisting observation. Negative on detailed description control. Visual characteristics are inconsistent, but I'm detecting weapons systems that appear to be charging. The moment she spoke those words, the unknown aircraft transmitted directly to her, bypassing radio frequencies entirely and speaking inside her mind through the neural interface. Captain Kozlov, you pilot stolen technology. Return it and no harm will come to your fleet. Valentina's blood turned to ice. The voice was mechanical yet somehow familiar, carrying harmonics that resonated with memories she couldn't quite place. "Who are you?" she transmitted back, not knowing if the Phantom systems could even carry her thoughts to the unknown. "We are the inheritors of what you call the future. The technology you use was taken from one of our scouts during your year 2019. Its return is not negotiable." 2019. Valentina's mind raced back through her classified missions, searching for anything that might connect to this impossible encounter. Then it hit her, Operation Dark Mirror, the recovery mission over the South China Sea that had gone wrong in ways the official reports couldn't explain. She'd been part of a team sent to investigate a crashed aircraft of unknown origin, but when they'd arrived at the coordinates, they'd found only empty ocean and wreckage that had seemed to vanish the moment they'd tried to collect it. "The South China Sea incident," she transmitted. "You're talking about the scout we never found." "You found it. Your engineers have spent 5 years attempting to understand technology that was never meant for your species. The Phantom you pilot is an abomination built from fragments of our scout's quantum matrix." Through the neural interface, Valentina could feel the unknown's weapon systems fully activating energy patterns that made the Phantom's advanced sensors recoil in what felt almost like fear. But she could also sense something else. The unknown was hesitating, as if waiting for her to make the first move. "Control, this is Reaper," she transmitted on military frequencies. "The unknown is claiming we built the Phantom from recovered technology. It's demanding we return what we took." Admiral Hayes' voice crackled back immediately. "Negative, Reaper. That's classified information. How could it know about Operation Dark Mirror?" But before Valentina could respond, the unknown transmitted again. "Because, Captain Kozlov, you have flown missions through time itself without knowing it. Every impossible survival, every encounter with the unexplained. You have been unstuck from your proper timeline since the day you first touched our technology. The entity you call Blackbird 6 exists in your past because he is simultaneously in your future." The words hit her like a physical blow. Blackbird 6, her former squadron commander, the man who died 3 years ago but had somehow sent her encrypted messages tonight. The impossible missions, the encounters that defied explanation, the way she always seemed to be in the right place at the right time, it all suddenly made a horrifying kind of sense. "You're saying I've been traveling through time." "Not traveling, existing across multiple temporal coordinates simultaneously. The neural interface you now wear was designed to stabilize that condition, to allow you to operate effectively despite your chronological displacement." The unknown aircraft began to circle the Phantom, its movements hypnotic and somehow predatory. Through her enhanced senses, Valentina could perceive 11 other unknowns holding position at various points around her, forming a three-dimensional cage in the night sky. "What do you want from me?" "Choose, Captain. Return the stolen technology and accept relocation to your proper timeline, where you will live out your natural lifespan in ignorance of these events. Or continue to serve as a guardian for a species that has stolen from the future, knowing that every mission brings you closer to temporal dissolution." Valentina felt the weight of the choice settling on her shoulders like lead. Below, the USS Gerald R. Ford continued its combat preparations, dozens of conventional aircraft preparing to engage enemies they couldn't hope to understand. Behind her, the Senkaku Islands waited in darkness, whatever the unknowns had planned for them still a mystery. And if I refuse both options? The unknown's response carried undertones of what might have been respect. Then you fight us, Captain, and we discover whether stolen technology guided by human determination can overcome the inheritors of time itself. Through the phantom sensors, Valentina could feel the carrier battle group spread out below, thousands of sailors depending on her decision. But she could also sense something else, a vast network of similar encounters happening across the globe, other impossible aircraft challenging other impossible pilots, all part of some larger pattern she couldn't yet comprehend. The future was waiting for her answer. Valentina felt the phantom respond to her thoughts before she'd fully formed them, the aircraft's systems integrating with her decision-making process in ways that transcended normal pilot-machine interfaces. Through the neural link, she could sense the unknowns surrounding her, their patient waiting like predators allowing prey to make the first move. "Control, this is Reaper," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. "I'm engaging the unknowns. Whatever happens next, make sure the Ford gets clear of this area." Admiral Hayes' response was immediate. "Negative, Reaper. You are not authorized to engage without support. Fall back to the carrier and wheel." "Sir," Valentina cut him off, "with all due respect, conventional aircraft won't be effective against these targets. The Phantom is the only asset we have that might stand a chance." She could feel the unknowns reacting to her decision, their formations shifting with liquid grace as they prepared for combat. But there was something else in their movement patterns, a kind of ritual formality, as if this engagement was following rules she didn't understand. The lead unknown transmitted again. "Captain Kozlov, you choose conflict over wisdom. We acknowledge your courage, but courage alone will not preserve your timeline." "Then let's find out what will," Valentina replied, and dove the Phantom into a vertical spiral that should have torn any conventional aircraft apart. The Phantom responded to her intentions like an extension of her own body pulling maneuvers that existed at the edge of physics. But the unknowns matched her movements effortlessly, their own impossible aircraft dancing through three-dimensional space with a grace that made her realize she wasn't just fighting advanced technology. She was fighting something that understood the very nature of flight in ways humanity hadn't yet discovered. The first exchange of fire came without warning. Energy weapons that appeared as ribbons of distorted space lanced between the aircraft, the unknown's fire controlled and precise, obviously intended to disable rather than destroy. The Phantom's defensive systems activated automatically, creating barriers of charged particles that deflected the incoming energy, but Valentina could feel the strain on the aircraft's power systems. "Reaper, we're tracking 12 energy discharges in your area," came the voice from the carrier. "What's your status?" "Still flying, Control," she reported, throwing the Phantom into a climbing turn that brought her face to face with one of the unknowns. At close range, she could see details that her enhanced perception had missed before. The craft wasn't just using advanced technology. It was technology, a living machine that responded to the consciousness guiding it with the same neural integration she was experiencing. The realization hit her like lightning. The unknowns weren't pilots flying advanced aircraft. They were pilots who had become their aircraft. Consciousness merged with technology in ways that transcended the human distinction between operator and machine. "You begin to understand," the lead unknown transmitted, its artificial voice carrying what might have been approval. "The future you glimpse is not one of humans using technology, but of consciousness evolved beyond the limitations of flesh." Valentina fired the Phantom's primary weapon, a particle beam that cut through the night like a sword of pure energy. The unknown she'd targeted simply stepped sideways, through dimensional space, appearing instantly in a position that should have been impossible to reach. "But that evolution comes at a price," she transmitted back, bringing the phantom around in a pursuit curve. "You're not human anymore, are you? We are what humans become when they stop limiting themselves to a single point in time and space. The question, Captain, is whether your species is ready for that transformation, or whether it will destroy itself trying to understand technology it was never meant to possess." The battle continued in 3 dimensions, aircraft that existed partially outside normal physics engaging in combat that rewrote the rules of aerial warfare with every exchange. But Valentina began to notice something in the unknown's tactics. They were holding back, not trying to destroy the Phantom, but testing it, pushing her to use capabilities she didn't know the aircraft possessed. Through the neural interface, she felt the Phantom systems evolving in real time, responding to the combat situation by unlocking hidden capabilities. Weapons she hadn't known existed came online, defensive measures activated that seemed to bend reality around the aircraft. And most disturbing of all, she began to sense other timelines where this battle was playing out differently. In one timeline, she died in the first exchange of fire. In another, she never engaged at all. In a third, the unknowns never appeared, and humanity continued developing in ignorance of what waited in their future. But in this timeline, the one she was living, something different was happening. "Captain Kozlov," the lead unknown transmitted, "you are adapting faster than our projections indicated. The neural integration is proceeding beyond design parameters." Valentina realized with growing alarm that the Phantom wasn't just responding to her thoughts. It was changing her thoughts, expanding her consciousness to accommodate capabilities that human minds weren't designed to handle. She could feel her awareness stretching across multiple dimensional planes, perceiving the battle from perspectives that shouldn't have been possible. "Control," she transmitted, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. "The Phantom is changing me. The neural interface is more than just a control system." Admiral Hayes' response carried a note of panic. "Reaper, return to base immediately. We're seeing anomalous readings from your aircraft that suggest system malfunction." But Valentina knew it wasn't malfunction. It was evolution. The same process the unknowns had undergone, the transformation from human pilot to something beyond the limitations of flesh and linear time. And she was beginning to understand that this had always been the real test, not whether she could fight the unknowns, but whether she could become one of them. The choice was no longer between past and future. It was between remaining human or becoming something else entirely. Through the expanding network of her consciousness, Valentina sensed the moment of decision approaching like a storm front. The unknowns had ceased their attacks, forming a sphere around the Phantom, as if waiting for her transformation to complete itself. Below, the carrier battle group continued its preparations for a conventional engagement that would never come, while above, the stars themselves seemed to be watching the outcome of a choice that would determine humanity's future. "The integration is irreversible now," the lead unknown transmitted, its voice carrying what might have been sympathy. "You can fight the process and retain your humanity while losing your sanity, or you can accept it and become something your species has never seen before." Valentina felt the neural interface deepening its connection to her mind, showing her visions of possible futures that stretched across centuries of human development. In some, humanity remained earthbound and limited, eventually destroying itself through warfare and environmental collapse. In others, they learned to transcend physical limitations, spreading across the galaxy as evolved consciousness rather than biological entities. "Why me?" she transmitted, though the question felt academic now as her awareness continued expanding beyond the boundaries of her original self. "Because you were already unstuck in time, Captain. The temporal displacement caused by your early exposure to our technology made you compatible with the neural interface in ways no other human has been. You are the bridge between what your species is and what it could become. The phantom systems were fully integrated with her consciousness now, and through them, she could perceive the entire Pacific theater of operations as if from a god's eye view. Every ship, every aircraft, every human life spread out below in patterns of light and intention. But more than that, she could see the threads of probability that connected present choices to future outcomes. Control, she transmitted, though her voice now carried harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. This is Reaper. The situation has evolved beyond initial parameters. Reaper, your transmission is barely comprehensible. Return to base immediately for medical evaluation. But Valentina, or the entity she was becoming, could no longer return to base in any meaningful sense. The phantom existed across multiple dimensional planes now, visible to conventional sensors only when she chose to manifest in normal space-time. She had become something that existed simultaneously in past, present, and future, able to perceive the consequences of actions before they were taken. Through her expanded awareness, she sensed other transformed pilots scattered across the globe, each one a bridge between humanity's present and its possible futures. Some had gone mad from the transition, their consciousness fragmenting across too many timelines to maintain coherence. Others had become cold and alien, losing touch with their human origins in favor of cosmic perspectives that rendered individual lives meaningless. But a very few, had found a balance, retaining their humanity while gaining capabilities that transcended normal limitations. These were the Guardians, the Watchers who prevented humanity from destroying itself while guiding it toward evolutionary paths that led to transcendence rather than extinction. "Welcome to the network," transmitted a familiar voice that she recognized with shock as Blackbird 6, her former squadron commander who had supposedly died 3 years ago. "I've been waiting for you to join us, Reaper." "Commander," Valentina's consciousness reached out across the dimensional barriers separating them, finding him stationed at a temporal coordinate roughly 20 years in the future. "You've been, like this, since your death." "Death is a relative concept when you exist across multiple timelines simultaneously," he replied, his transmission carrying the weight of accumulated experience. "The training accident that killed my physical body was actually my integration with an early prototype of the neural interface. I've been operating from future timelines ever since, guiding events to ensure you would be in position for this moment." The implications staggered her. Everything that had happened, her recruitment for tonight's mission, the appearance of the unknowns, even her original exposure to the alien technology during Operation Dark Mirror.